Welcome, Judith Pearson.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. So, how do you introduce yourself, Judith?
Usually, Judith Pearson. My friends call me Judy. You can call me Judy. It's
Okay.
I'm perfectly fine with that. So,
And what are you up to in the world right now? Like, what are you known for in your circle?
I'm in private practice, so I'm still doing that kind of thing. And I'm the director of the International Masterson Institute. I studied under James Masterson and was supervised by him and went through his 3-year training program. And when he became too ill to work, he kind of handed the institute over to me. By that time, I was already clinical director of the institute, but I've been a devotee, a fan
Yeah.
for a very long time.
That's cool. And where did you do your studies?
I did my undergraduate stuff at Brooklyn College, and then I got my PhD at Fordham, and then I did my postgraduate work, the 3-year postgraduate Masterson training.
Amazing. And Judith, I'm so curious. I always ask, particularly therapists or psychologists or coaches, how did you get into this work? Like, why this career?
When I worked at a psychiatric hospital for 12 years. I was first worked on a ward as a psychologist, and then I was the intern supervisor. And when I was a ward psychologist, my supervisor asked me the same question. And I said to him, I kind of think I was always the therapist in my family. It's just a continuation of life somehow.
Exactly. A lot of us totally. So in other words, your
exactly.
childhood, you were the helper, healer, sensitive one, tracking the family dynamics. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I was the one that people talked to when they had issues going on. And I actually had a sister who had severe mental illness, so I was kind of took care of her. And but in addition to that, I started off in college as an English major.
Mm-hmm.
I loved literature. I loved the whole thing. And then by the time I was in my junior year, I sat down with myself and said, there's no way you're going to wind up being an academic and writing papers about, stuff like that. And I realized what drew me to literature, although I'm an avid reader. I'm addicted. I'm really addicted. I get withdrawal symptoms if I don't have a book. I'm known to run out and buy a book that I already have sitting on my nightstand because I bought it. So I decided that I love the character portrayals, but they don't go anywhere. They're static in the book,
Yeah.
And so I thought, maybe I should try this with real people. And so I switched my major to psychology.
That's cool.
It covers everything. It covers philosophy. It covers
That's so awesome.
Psychology. It covers the arts. There's room for a broad range of stuff if you study psychology.
Yeah, completely. And why personality disorders, which is what we're going to get into here in a minute. I'm assuming the psych ward, obviously, like being on a psych ward, I've never worked on one. I've worked in residential treatment. I've worked at mental health centers. But psych ward is a whole different kind of person.
Yep, whole different animal. And, I started out, I did my internship. I got offered a job to stay on the wards, and I did. And walking into the world of what were essentially, I worked at a hospital that was deep in the heart of the Bronx, which is a very impoverished neighborhood. And so, there were people that came in with all kinds of, I did not work at a fancy hospital like Kernberg where they have tennis courts. And I wanted to stay in Kernberg's hospital. At tennis courts, they had poetry readings every month.
Wow. It was like the privileged place.
furniture. It would have been
High-end psych ward.
yeah. No, that was not my psych. That was not my psych ward. My psych ward, maybe the best way to describe it is they finally put condoms on the wards because the patients do have sex, even though they're not supposed to.
Uh-huh.
I thought, yippee, until I found out that the condoms they put on the ward were Army rejects.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
Wow. Where was the funding coming from for this psych ward?
It's a state-funded psychiatric hospital.
Right.
It's
Limited budget.
Lower than that. Meanwhile, I was pursuing my graduate studies and deciding that I needed to go for postgraduate training. And there were a number of places I could have gone. And actually, what drew me to the Institute was they had a presentation. There were 4 people then, Masterson and Richard Fisher, Ralph Klein, Candace Orcutt. And I sat and listened to them and thought to myself, these are the smartest people I've ever heard in my life. And I like how they think. I like how they do therapy. And so, I mean, I could have gone to a bunch of other places, but I thought, no, I'm hanging with these guys. And someday I'm going to be on faculty here.
Yeah.
That was my thought.
That's so cool. How old were you then?
Oh, I was old. I was probably 40. I mean, I started late. I waited till my kids went off to school and whatever, and then decided I needed to go do something.
Got it. Wow. And you have how many adult children?
I have 2 adult children.
Okay. Got it. And man, and so it makes sense to me, like psych ward, 12 years, personality disorders, it's actually not a huge leap. If you would have gone like psych ward to, I don't know, private practice with high functioning sort of adults that had just basic neurotic problems.
This is where I think a lot of the trouble comes in. And I think...
Okay, good. You're going to call me on my assumptions here.
I'm going to call the whole psychological field on their assumptions here.
Okay, good.
A large part of it. The portrayal of personality disorders in the DSM is awful.
By the way, what's that beeping? Do you know, is that you on your side or my side? There's a
I don't
occasional...
hear it.
Okay.
I don't hear it. So
sorry. The portrayal of the DSM.
Yeah, is of the lowest level of the disorder. The most blatant, the lowest level of the disorder. Okay. Personality disorder occurs when there is a fixation or arrest in the pre-Oedipal period, essentially.
0 to 3.
0 to 3, exactly. Yeah. Before whole object representations happen.
Yeah.
And so everybody's got some of that in them.
Yeah.
And I think that, they reflect a certain, each one of them reflects a particular kind of relational trauma.
Yeah.
And so I've had people come out. I'm working with a woman now whose borderline is the day is long, but she's an astrophysicist.
Yeah. I mean, some of these folks are extremely high functioning.
A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. Yes. Yeah. And we never peg them. Right.
But it only showed, like, this is what's interesting about personality disorders, and we'll talk about that term here in a minute, is how high functioning someone can be, yet it's the relationship. If they get into an intimate partnership, that's where it kind of all gets exposed.
Right.
Would you agree?
A lot of stuff comes up. Yeah. And then again, you will see varying levels. Masterson very astutely categorized each of the disorders. And by the way, in his later, around the time you're reading the Real Self thing, in his later work, he stopped calling it personality disorders. He called it disorders of the self.
Yeah, that's right. I think you told me that. Yeah.
And I honestly, way back in the day, they were called character disorders. That made sense to me. Mm-hmm. I know what I have no idea what a personality is.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any idea what that means?
I mean, it'd be hard to define actually right now if you ask me.
I know that there are personalities like Bruce Springsteen is a personality. But I don't. Character to me indicates some depth. Personality to me indicates something
surfacey.
Yeah, rather shallow. Shallow. So I never liked the term. Disorder of the self makes sense to me.
Yeah. So disorder of the self. So let me see if I can describe what I'm reading, and you can fill it out or correct me. Between 0 and 3, there's a relational injury, like you pointed out, and depending on how the injury is, whether it's kind of an intrusion or a cold distancing or punishing of the mother, often the mother, usually the caregiver, but it's often the mother. It creates enough hurt that the child develops what I call a strategy to make sure it doesn't get worse and to keep favor and connection with the mother. And that strategy becomes what we call a personality disorder.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much money. I think that, we also call it a strategy, but essentially it becomes a negotiation, right? And that strategy is the development of a false self.
Yeah.
Developing some mode of interacting, of being that brings parental approval and connection and warmth and love and whatever, but doesn't take into account necessarily the child's real feelings, needs, desired, which are often disparaged.
Exactly. And this is what's so tragic, I think, for children, is because of the parents' wounds or addictions or full-time jobs or whatever, they have their own values and priorities and behaviors, and then their child triggers them, and this happens enough times it sort of starts to calcify into a certain architecture of the strategy of a child, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, that now is sort of set up for life to respond to relational stress a certain way.
That's exactly right. And that's what essentially what an internalized object relations unit is. It is the structure of those interactions that becomes internalized and therefore a part of the child. And the reason you see the way I showed it to you, that line, all pre-Oedipal disorders manifest splitting, right? The good is separated from the bad.
Let's slow this down. This is an important point. You called it splitting. Let's unpack this a little more. So a child gets hurt, goes into it must be something wrong with me, or and then there's something right with me. Like, help us understand what splitting.
Okay. Essentially, splitting. It was a construct that first, I think, was set out by Melanie Klein. And basically, because the child's ego is so weak and because they need in their mind the notion that the person upon whom their survival depends is essentially good, they will compartmentalize off the bad. It'll go underground. So splitting essentially is separating the good from the bad. I can give you my favorite example, which is from my own personal experience.
Yeah, please.
So I walk in, my daughter is sitting with her 1.5-year-old son, who's lying on his bed, crying his eyes out. They obviously had just had a fight of some kind or whatever. She's sitting with him. I walk into the room. He looks at me and he says, "I want mommy." He didn't like that mommy that was sitting with him. That wasn't mommy. He wanted the good mommy back, not this mean lady that had just done something to make him cry. And I thought, man, if this was ever an example of split, if there was ever an example of split, that's it.
So his child, your grandson, split you and his mother. You're the good mother, and
split his mother into a good mother and a bad mother.
Oh, okay. So, but he wasn't projecting you as the good mother.
No, he was just telling me he wants mommy. He wants,
He wants the good mom back.
He doesn't want that creepy mom
Okay.
that's sitting on his bed with him. He wants the good one back.
Right. And then in sort of healthy child development, eventually the child learns that mom is both good and bad. She sets boundaries.
That's right. That, unless you have a PD where these models are fixated, that happens at the 3-year-old stage. At around 36 months, there's an integration of good and bad self, good and bad object into
other
object relations.
Got it.
If
And this is
stated, then that split remains forever.
Well, we'll get into forever in a minute because these can be treated, which you do every day. So we'll get into how do we treat these and how does a therapist or a coach or a practitioner like really work with this. But just slowing this down is so helpful for, I think, everyone here listening and me. If the child at 3 can't hold that the parent is sometimes challenging and sometimes supportive, they become fixated on the more challenged side, right? That there's this negative mother, negative figure, and then they internalize it. Is that what also happens?
No, it's not quite like that. What happens sometimes, in fact, often you will see with patients, they won't hold the bad side at all. They won't fixate on the bad side at all. And sometimes you'll get alternating perspectives. So, for example, anytime a patient walks into my room and sits down and says, now look, before we get started, I want to tell you, I had the best parents in the world. I'm like, oh my God, we're in trouble.
I always think the same thing. Yeah.
We are really in trouble here. Here's an example that comes to my mind of splitting. This was a young borderline woman called. She came in, she wanted to come in for therapy. She felt like she was having problems. She's probably about 22, something like that. So I walk into the waiting room for our first session to go get her, and I see this sight. She's there. Her mom's there. And her mom is resting her head on the daughter's shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Yeah, we know where that's going.
Well, we know where that's been. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Where it's going. So she comes in and she, starts to talk to me, and she gives me a little bit of her history. But before she does all of this, she tells me what a great mom she has, and see how her mom came with her, and how supportive she is, and how wonderful she is, and how wonderful she's always been, and blah, 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 blah. And then she gives me her history and happens to mention the fact that when she was 14, she ran away from home. I'm like, so tell me about that. What? Yeah. And she's like, oh, because my mother used to beat me. Zero connection between the fact that she was just telling me she had this super wonderful mother who was supportive to her for her whole childhood, and this other one. It was a clear paradigm of splitting, that one side knew nothing about the other side. And you'll see this with people. I had a borderline patient who came in devastated because her boyfriend broke up with her, tears, buckets, and she only wanted John and John and John every session, John and John and John. She went to a party. She met this guy, Albert. John was all of a sudden the worst person in the world, and Albert was like the king of the universe.
Yeah. So describe, since we're here, let's describe what are typically known as the 3 types, borderline, narcissism, and schizoid. And Masterson talked about the covert, overt narcissist.
Right.
And I know these are all on a spectrum of sort of high functioning, low functioning, whatever we want to use. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of each one of those?
I can do that. And that's where those diagrams that I sent, if you want to pull it out and look at it, it'll actually help you to go through this. Okay. So we can start with the borderline. That's where Masterson started and whatever. Now you can see that there's the splitting defense, runs right down the middle, separating the good side where all the nice, fun, loving interactions were, and they get internalized into what he called the rewarding or libidinal part. So we call it the rewarding object relations units.
And let's be, just for the listener, because they're not familiar with object relations, can we call that mother or other, or what can we call object relations units?
It's maybe the other guy's terminology for the same thing will help. We call it Bowlby's, an internal working model of the relation, an internalized working model.
Okay.
Essentially, what the relationship has been.
Mm-hmm.
All the good stuff goes on one side, and all the bad stuff goes on the other side of the split.
Okay. So the person, let's say your 22-year-old woman is split. Good stuff on one side, bad stuff on the other.
Right. Good mom on one side, bad on the other.
Okay.
A neurotic, a whole object related person would say, my mom has done some really nice things for me. And in certain ways, she's been very, she ironed my blouses before I went to school. And
she made my lunch. She drove me to school. She was there for me.
She drove me to school. She helped me with my homework.
Yeah.
Went shopping together. We loved the same shows on TV, But when she lost her temper, she would beat the crap out of me.
Yeah.
That's somebody who can appreciate a whole object, not this whole fairy tale of the great mom. And then, but I ran away because she used to beat me, as if it were completely incidental.
Yeah. So my terminology would be like, we have a one-sided mother or a whole mother. Right. The whole mother is, she's sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes challenging, sometimes supportive.
And with the self.
Yeah. Yep. Great.
So let me just lay out for you what exactly, and for everyone, what exactly an object relations unit is, so it won't be so foreign. Okay.
Sure.
So an object relations unit is essentially premised on the affect tone of the interaction between parent and child, the affective tone. That's the difference between the good side and the bad side. So it essentially consists of what the representation of the other feels like at that moment, what the representation of the self feels like at that moment, and the affect that links them. Okay. So if on the good side, you've got a good self that's loved and cared for and special and wonderful and whatever, and a good mom who's caretaking and approves of you, and the linking affect is of feeling good and special and lovely and all that. Mm-hmm. If the interactions are negative, the ones that are negative, then you are going to have a representation of an object mother who is bad, mean, cruel, critical, harsh, devaluing, neglectful, not present, a self-representation of being inadequate, worthless, damaged, a monster, a creature, whatever. The linking affect there is of being, it can be despair, it can be fragmentation, it can be, any of those kind of negative.
Passive aggressive, whatever.
Well, but the point being, each of the personality disorders is defined by the content of those units, because the interactions that produce each of the pathologies are consistent, but they differ from each other. Yeah. They are consistent within themselves, but they are different from each other.
Consistently negative experiences, but different in how their flavor, tone.
Positive experiences if certain conditions are fulfilled.
Okay.
Okay, so you asked about the borderline, the schizoid.
And the narcissist.
Each one of those categorizations will be determined by the content of these units, object relations units, which in turn reflect the nature of the interaction between the parent and the child. Am I clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So with the borderline, what the mother wants from the child is not to separate or individuate. The mother cannot tolerate the child's separateness because of her own loneliness, pathology, borderlineness herself, whatever it is.
Yeah.
She cannot tolerate. So she will, every time the child tries to separate or individuate, she will somehow or other find a way to make the child feel terrible about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So this astrophysicist woman that I have, who's, I cannot tell you how this woman has struggled to get to the place. She must have an IQ in the 200s, because the amount of struggle she has to write a single paper is just, her mother would tell her when she was a child, if she got into a plane to go away from her, away from the mother, she would die.
Yeah. I mean, that is so manipulative and so intense. God.
Very, very intense. And so when she got a scholarship to Oxford, guess what? She developed fear of flying.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for her to get empowered, we could define that, but for her to get empowered, she has to face abandonment depression to get empowered. And so she then, she starts to develop habits over her life where she's going to do everything but feel that, right? So early on, mom is keeping her from getting empowered because that means mom would have to face a loss, and mom doesn't want that.
She's every time she activates herself now, she is guilty.
Yeah.
She is terribly guilty, and she has trouble, and she bursts into tears. Her mother would call her in meetings, in classes, and whatever. Her mother would yell at her that she's not living next door. Her mother wanted her to be a hairdresser living next door to her.
Yeah.
That's what the mother wanted. When this woman, when she was a child, a teenager, whatever, when the mother would leave the house, she would lock the girl into her room and tell her to sleep until the mother came back. She didn't even want her alive.
God.
When the mother was gone.
Okay, so this is a pretty extreme example.
This is an extreme example.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, this is also in I've seen cases where the mother is just, her whole identity is being a mother and being a, quote, good mom. And that means my daughter and I are attached at the hip and we do everything together and we're so close and we're so tight. And meanwhile, the dad's off completely kind of like getting that I can't get involved. And they all unconsciously agree to that dynamic. And then anytime the girl tries to self-actuate, she's punished or ignored or rejected or made wrong.
It's a bargain. The father participates often. He participates. He just backs off.
Yeah, he just disappears, basically.
It's essentially, listen, I gave you a child. You don't need me anymore. And sometimes, the fathers resent it, but very often they're like, I can go now. It's not. But yes, I had a young borderline woman, not this extreme, come in and say, you know that TV program. What was it? The Gilmore Girls. My mother and I were like that. We do everything together. We talk about everything together. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
I'm
red
sorry.
flags.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And she was having a struggle. She was in college. She was having a struggle. She was like, I want to go shopping and pick out my own clothes. But I think it will hurt my mom's feelings because she always buys my clothes for me.
Yeah. Is a male... Oh my God. I'm just thinking of another client I saw once years ago, where a male client. So now I'm thinking this person was borderline. I didn't know it at the time, but you tell me, male client who talks to his mom every day on the phone, adult male client, in his 30s, married, and the wife is feeling threatened by the relationship to mom, mother, and son because he has more of an alliance and allegiance to his mother than his own wife. Is that pretty borderline-ish behavior?
Be borderline. It could be narcissistic, that the mother and the son are fused completely and they are in this idealizing. That's what I'm saying, that is that it's a clue, but it's not the whole story, the symptom. So you have to put together a lot of things, of things to come to a diagnosis. And we work hard to make our diagnosis. We spend some time at it because the diagnosis will then determine what kind of treatment.
Okay. Let's move to either the schizoid or the narcissist, just so we can get a flavor of that in childhood and then maybe in adulthood.
Okay, narcissist very quickly. With the narcissistic patient, what you get, the narcissist fixation, the developmental fixation occurs at an earlier phase of development than with the borderline, which a lot of people will not cotton to because narcissists can be much higher functioning. But remember, borderlines are rewarded for not functioning well. But the narcissist's interpersonal functioning is on the floor. We don't need any more, examples than, we kind of know that from life. They don't know how to. So it comes at a phase of development that runs from about, 8 months to maybe 15 months, something like that. The practicing subphase, Mahler calls it. And Dan Stern calls it the phase of the core self. Anyway, at this point, it's when the child is first beginning to learn how to walk. It's beginning to take actual physical separation from the mother. You think about those little kids. I'm sure they blow my mind. These babies, they get up.
I know.
They walk, they fall.
It's incredible to watch.
They get up, they try to walk, they fall.
Yeah.
Over. And this is practicing.
Yeah.
That's why it's called practicing. So
cool. Yeah.
But the wings, the wind beneath their wings is the sense that they are fused with mom. All her power is part of them. So there's an idealization from the child to the mother. And at this point, the child needs that mirroring from the mother also, that they are perfect and special and wonderful. And they need all of that good mirroring coming toward them.
Yeah.
Can take two forms, the narcissistic fusion. One is that the parent idealizes the child. You see a lot of that, but I mean, to the point where they will not accept any imperfection from their child at all. I think every parent idealizes their child and should, but absolutely.
Me included, yeah.
And it's healthy. But when it gets to the point where if the child does anything that is not perfect, it creates havoc in the parent, then we've got a problem.
Okay.
So in this particular constellation where the parent, and by the way, Masterson talked about a guy who came in one day and talked about his kid, 1.5-year-old kid running around a barber shop while the dad was getting a haircut, wrecking the place. And the guy asked him, please, will you contain your child? And he said, no, I want him to grow up and feel like he can do anything he wants.
Oh, shit. Oh, man.
This is how you build a little narcissist. This is how you do it.
Wow.
So when there is something like that, where there is this huge investment in the child's perfection and you don't allow anything else, and the child, of course, feels like they have to develop this false self of perfection and maintain it. And they're terrified that that'll all go crashing down and that they will be thrown into the pits. And
this is like professional athletes. There's probably a lot of professional athletes in this category that are like perfect, right? Gymnasts or Olympians, where the parent is like the militant.
Well, and also a lot of businessmen are like this. Achievers, a lot of achievers are like this, you know.
Yeah.
So
you said the mirroring comes in two forms: narcissistic fusion, and then
so the fusion is there, but it can operate in two ways. One is when the parent but the other one is when the parent wants the child to idealize them. And there's always a little bit of both going on, but one will usually be foremost, and that is what the covert or closet narcissist is. they form a connection, an idealized relationship with a person that they deem, and then they get the reflected glory from that person. I remember doing a presentation at a conference about this narcissism thing, and Masterson's secretary came over to me and she said, "You know what, Judy? I think I'm a closet narcissist," because she idealized the hell out of Jim.
Mm-hmm.
He could do no wrong in her eyes. So they bask in the glow of the reflected glory of this.
And the adult, James, in this case, doesn't necessarily have to participate in that. He's just the recipient of those projections.
Of that. And sometimes they do participate and sometimes not. I don't think he needed Nancy to idealize him, but I don't think he was unaware that was what was going on. And so those are the two sides of that narcissistic thing. And the units are different from the borderline. With the borderline, you get the reward for regression thing. They want to be cared for and whatever. With the narcissist, it's a feeling of grandiosity and superiority and being connected to a grandiose, omnipotent other. That is the internalized picture. Yeah. And the interventions that you use are different.
Hey, if you want to uplevel your life, your relationship life specifically, I want you to consider our Relationship Mastery program. It's 9 months of complete transformation where you become a better listener, a better communicator, you learn how to have secure relationships, and you get an experiential taste of that. You feel seen and supported and challenged to reach your relationship goals. And really, you become a better communicator. So many people have gone through this course now. And we have a done with you version of it now, which is amazing, where you get assigned a private relationship coach. You get to do live group coaching with me once a month and ask me anything you want. There's office hours where you get to meet with one of our coaches to nerd out on the curriculum. And the community is very strong. And these are people who care a lot about relationships and they want to get what they want to get, which is they want to be in a relationship and not betray themselves, right? They want to get the relationship they want while being true to themselves. That's what most of us want. And this course is the path for you to get that. Here's what one of our participants in the past has said about this course.
When I first started, I felt really unsure and kind of on rocky ground in terms of relationship and where I was going and what my life was all about. And what I've learned in the program is that I have needs and I can actually speak them. And when I do that, I'm way more clear. I'm easier to be around because I know what I want and need. I've also realized that I have had issue with boundaries, and now that I'm more clear on my needs, boundaries are more clear as well. So that's been a gigantic piece for me. Life is relationship, right? And so knowing where you stand and then how to relate that to other people could change a person's life completely. It has changed mine.
All right. Amazing words from one of our heartfelt students here at the Relationship School. If you want to change your life like they did, go to relationshipschool.com/relationship mastery, and we'll see you in there. Let's use an example. Like, do you have an example from your caseload of someone in their 20s or 30s or 40s that's more of a covert narcissist?
Oh, lots of them, yes.
And tell us like a story or give us an example of how this shows up so the listener can like be thinking of people in their life, like family members or friends or whoever.
Yeah, no, I mean, they will, it was...
particularly how they show up in a relation, like an intimate marriage.
Okay, so I'll It came out in the room, it came out in the transference, and then later she talked about it in relation to her relationship with her husband. So she came in, this woman, and she told me a dream that she had about wasps and stinging her and whatever. I asked her what she made of the dream, and she told me that it had something to do with something hurtful that happened to her, and the wasps were that and whatever. And I said, yeah. I think the next session she came in and she said to me that she was really upset with me that I didn't interpret her dream more. And I said to her, I think you have a really hard time not thinking of me as someone who is more expert, more perfect, more special than you because you really interpreted your dream well. I don't know that there was anything I could have added that you hadn't already said, but I think it really disappointed you that I didn't have some special magic
Yeah.
to add. And she paused and she looked at me and she said, I always do that. I always put people on pedestals and then they fall. And I've done that with my husband my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done this, right? Like with teachers or idols or
I
whatever.
think
People have done this with me, right? So there's a part of this that's normal when we put someone we look up to on a pedestal.
You have to do it. And if you don't, you fall apart and fragment and sink into abandonment. And we've all had experiences of idealizing someone and finding out that they have clay feet. I think that's all part of growing up and whatever. But if it doesn't kill us, then,
This is an important question about the covert narcissist from my experience is, are you kind of saying that, okay, we all put people on pedestals, that's a normal human behavior, but with a covert narcissist, they can never self-activate and be the person they're projecting up to, because if they self-activate, they have to face that abandonment depression, right? Like, whereas a quote normal person uses a authority figure as inspiration to get empowered, and then they keep getting empowered, and then one day
themselves, right?
Right. Is that kind of is that fair?
They may be disappointed, but they're not going to fall apart and fragment and feel like the world's worst human being if that other person doesn't come through for them.
Yeah.
So
this is so helpful. So, and then we haven't really talked about abandonment depression. I think it's worth just pausing for a second and saying something about this, that it seems kind of counterintuitive that people with personality, just a person, would not want to get self-activated and get empowered. But to them, especially if you think of a 0 to 3-year-old, it's life or death. It's that it feels that terrifying. And what is define abandonment depression for us so people understand what that means?
Abandonment depression. So very quickly, Masterson started as the chief resident on the borderline adolescent unit at Payne Whitney Hospital in New York. When he came in as chief resident, he developed a whole different structure on the ward. It was a lot stricter. There were rules. There were consequences if the patients acted out, whatever. And the residents he was working with came to him and said, listen, a weird thing is happening. These guys are doing a hell of a lot better. They're functioning better. They're acting out is stopping. They're obeying the rules. They're making friends on the ward. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And they're getting increasingly depressed. Bit paradoxical, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing so much better. You should be, yippee. But no. And Masterson realized that this abandonment depression, this depression they were feeling, was a holdover from that period where they were told, essentially, in so many ways by the mom, that they're not allowed to self-activate. Mm-hmm. They're not allowed. It means leaving her. It means whatever. And the mother would withdraw her supplies from the child in consequence. There would be a punishment for that. So every time these patients would activate, the abandonment depression would come. Then they start their defensive acting out again.
Yeah.
Then there'd need to be an intervention, and then they get better. And so it was repetitive cycle. And by the way, I think this is true. This disorders of the self triad, we call it, is true for all the disorders. Self-activation leads to abandonment. Okay, so the abandonment depression is a reflection of the withdrawal of the mother's essentially libidinal supplies, the withdrawal of her love, attention, affection, acknowledgement.
And basically a baby who feels that or experiences that feels abandoned and then depressed.
They feel abandoned and terrified and depressed. So there are components to the abandonment depression, actually.
Okay.
It's called abandonment depression, but it's actually a constellation of affects. So suicidal depression, homicidal rage, panic and anxiety, guilt and shame, hopelessness and helplessness, emptiness and void.
Mm-hmm. Oof. I mean, just those sound so miserable.
Believe me, it's just when you get a patient who is really getting into the abandonment depression, it's heartbreaking and tragic. And
Totally.
and you see why they develop these defenses. And you think about, there's no way a 2-year-old can handle this.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. So they develop all these strategies in this architecture that then protects them against feeling that, right?
They develop a false self to kind of appease the parents and get along that way and all that kind of thing. So, yeah. So,
let me come back to a couple of questions about the narcissist, and then we can maybe touch briefly on the schizoid, and then we'll start wrapping up. In a marriage, would a covert narcissist be the type of person who early on projects a lot of just, you're the best thing in the world, infatuation, like they're totally in love, you're amazing.
Yep.
And then at a certain point, the person starts showing their flaws, and then what happens to the covert narcissist when the relationship starts to get real?
Ultimately will eventuate in narcissistic rage and devaluation. If the person disappoints them, or if they try to break the fusion. I had a couple once I was working with, and the man, who was not a covert, he was more a grandiose narcissist, the wife was the covert. He started a fight with his wife because his wife liked a different kind of soup from him. So he's arguing that Campbell's tomato soup is better than Campbell's chicken soup.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason this was so important to him, because it's nonsense, that she was breaking the fusion. He wanted her joined at the hip. Wanted her, quote, on the same page as him. So you will see this in narcissists. If somebody deviates, it will stir up anger because it's threatening.
Yep. Deviates or differentiates or becomes their own person with their own belief system and thoughts and values.
Not supposed to do never mind any of those things. Forget it.
Wow. Okay, let's move on just briefly to the schizoid. That's more of an avoidance style, as Masterson, I believe, called it.
Well, okay. Let me first.
And then, please plug in the attachment piece also, because a lot of people think these are synonymous: attachment, kind of injuries, and the injuries we're talking about, the disorder of the self stuff.
Well, all of these personality disorders have suffered from attachment injuries. Mm-hmm. They're just different orders of attachment injuries and different demands. The differentiating factor with the schizoid. So the borderline wants to be cared for. The narcissist wants mirroring, perfect supplies and beauty and power and wealth and whatever, and wants to be special. The schizoid's emphasis on safety. Safety. Because they lived in an environment where any attempt to connect with another brought anything from sadistic, exploitive, cruel behavior to complete lack of acknowledgement. The schizoid differs from the other two in that the schizoid was dehumanized and treated more like an object of use than a human being.
Really devalued in a really hurtful way.
They could have been totally neglected. They could have been, but then called upon to do, like one woman said to me, my sisters and I were an army of servants to serve my parents. And as for the rest, they completely ignored us. So you can have that complete kind of neglect, if you want to call it that. No interest. There was a woman I saw who, she used to cook and clean and whatever for her mom when she was 9 years old. And she said to her mom once when she was a grown-up, I wish you could have spent some time talking to me or asking me about my life or any questions or whatever. And the mom said to her, well, what can you say to a 7-year-old anyway? So there's that level.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's actual, I had a schizoid woman once. She had a pet dog. She grew up on a sheep farm in Australia. She had a pet dog. Her father shot the dog in front of her and basically told her it had to go because it was useless. Well, you can imagine she made herself pretty useful after that.
Mm. Oh, right. Of course. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, she was very busy serving others. So schizoids will talk to you, if and when they talk to you, they will often use terms like servant or slave or puppet, or their feelings are generally that of being. Now, we have a category that we call the secret schizoid. This is someone who looks from the outside like everybody. They have friends, they have spouses, they have kids. And by the way, this will be a pretty good proportion of your therapeutic population, because a lot of the really entrenched schizoids will never get it to therapy. They'll never get there. It's too threatening for them.
Yeah.
But the ones that come in, they're more on the libidinal side, on the good side of the split. They have a little bit of hope for human connection. And they have human connections. But one guy said to me, he said, and this is a lawyer with a wife and 2 kids and tons of friends and, old school ties and you name it. He said to me, I go to the events, I go to the parties, but really I'm not there. And I don't really see the point of why people get together with each other. So a lot of what you're going to know about a schizoid being a schizoid is going to come from what they tell you about their subjective experience.
Yeah.
The ones that are really entrenched, that are, closer to being on the spectrum or whatever, you're going to be able to see those. It's much harder to find the other ones. They sometimes look like narcissists. They sometimes, they're but you will get ultimately to that feeling of them needing to keep a distance because that is safety for them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they will do it by trying to stay above everyone else. So they'll project this kind of superiority and aloofness and whatever, self-sufficiency. But it's not the narcissism of the narcissist.
Yeah.
It's just, and then you'll get ones that keep themselves under everyone else. They're always serving everyone else and they're always running and doing for everyone else, but that's keeping they're not really borderline. They're just keeping a safe distance.
Yeah. Now, all 3 of these do unconsciously, of course, don't want to get empowered because it's so terrifying.
Oh, they like empowerment. They just don't want to connect. It's not about empowerment. There are I thought it was
a little bit about empowerment in terms of self-activation. And
no, there are very activated schizoids. They can do really, really, really well. It's about interpersonal stuff. Schizoids operate alone, and they are very busy trying to master everything because they need it to be self-sufficient. So they are very hungry to know how to do things, many of them. They are very hungry to know how to do things and become expert at things.
Except relationships.
What?
Except relationships.
Relationships scare them. Relationships scare them. And we define schizoid by having, and intervene by having what we call the schizoid dilemma, which is on the one hand, the wish to be connected. On the other hand, the fear of being connected. And then the third part of that is some compromise in between the two. And the compromise can be lots of different things. Like had a patient who had a long distance relationship. They didn't see each other for months on end, but they were on the computer with each other every day,
right.
Whatever. So it was a relationship literally at a distance.
Yeah. So I want to clarify this piece about empowerment and relationship. So the schizoid is all about empowerment, but fears relationships. With the other two, it's my understanding is it seems like they're not wanting to self-activate and get empowered because of they would have to face and work through their abandonment depression, which is part of the treatment that they're eventually going to have to deal.
The narcissist can become very powerful and very successful. You know that they're narcissists.
But that's their strategy. I mean, I'm talking about, when I talk about empowerment, I'm talking about like, I guess I should be more clear.
Real self-expression.
Real self-expression, real self,
the schizoid, no, none of them. None of them.
Okay. So it's more about the true self, getting connected to that, being authentic, and finding my voice there and expressing myself and activating that way is terrifying to all three.
Yes.
Okay.
And you're right, particularly to schizoids, because nobody ever wanted to hear their real self. Nobody ever supported it. They don't even believe they have a real self. They don't even believe that they are. Somebody, what did one guy say to me? I wanted to write that book, but I felt if I did, it would be making a statement that I have a right to exist, and I'm not even sure that I do. Yeah,
damn. Oof. Man, this runs so deep too with these people. It's just so, the scar is so deep,
Yeah, great.
So I'm hearing too, all three struggle in relationships, intimate relationships, and all three struggle to be their truest selves and express that, right?
Right.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Whew. Yeah. Well, as we wind down, I mean, I could go on. I love talking to you about this stuff. It's so fascinating to me.
It's very fascinating. Yes.
It's got my wheels turning. Now, you said something when you and I first met. You said something really powerful to me, because I'm still in that agreeing with the sort of psychological box that personality disorders are these extreme things and they're so rare and they're so terrible. And you were like, no, this is actually really common. And maybe most of us are on some sort of spectrum here, and most of us have had injuries between 0 and 3 years old.
Exactly.
So that was helpful. For the listener, what words of encouragement can you offer if someone is listening going, holy shit, that's me, or oh my God, that's my partner, I'm doomed? What would you say to them?
Yeah, we do not see anyone that has any of these disorders as doomed. Quite the contrary. We think that, however, I do think that it pays to find someone who can recognize and work with and understand what that person's internal struggle is all about, and offer them the help they need. Our whole institute is that. Yeah.
Now, here's what's interesting though, is a lot of people are not into labels, right? Well, we don't want to label people. We don't want to diagnose anyone. That's a really strong label, etc. Yet getting the label in some cases can be the thing that gets proper treatment.
Correct. And
so,
God forbid doctors took on the same thinking.
Right.
But they don't want to diagnose people. I would never go to a doctor who would say, I just don't want to categorize you in this kind of way or whatever.
No, you're right. Most of us are like, no, doc, tell me what it is. Tell me do I have rheumatoid arthritis?
Definitely, yeah. No, listen, this stuff is so out there now on the net and in the radio and whatever. So patients will come in and say, am I a borderline?
Right.
All the time. They want to know.
Uh-huh.
And I have had patients that will say to me, I don't diagnose people. In my head, I don't, but I don't sit there and say, you know what, you are this and this and this and this and whatever. But I've had people begging me to tell what they are.
And let me ask you this, when those people come in, is it useful to talk to them and kind of pull out a book and say, yeah, these are things, and this is probably what happened to you as a kid, and let's talk about it. And so therefore you're going to struggle in relationships. You're going to struggle to express yourself. So we need to work on X, Y, and Z.
What I do instead is I say, look, you can call it George for all I care, but I think what we need to figure out is what went on with you and your parents and your school and your relationship and whatever, and what are the patterns that you developed out of that, and how can we work to get the destructive ones out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I don't do bibliotherapy, and I don't sit there and tell people have. But I do tell them to think about, how do they handle it? How do they handle a relationship? What happens to them inside a relationship? What happens to them if they get a new job or if they lose their old job? What goes on inside? What kind of things set them off? What kind of things make them really, really sad or really, really angry? Or, it's really more, these are convenient, the labels, and I think they're just handy. But I think the real issue is the dynamics.
Yeah, exactly. And what they're challenged with in their life. And then you work on that.
Yeah,
totally.
exactly.
Judith, well, it's been a real treat chatting with you. I have another question that, and then we'll talk about the Masterson Institute or any links you have for us. I ask every guest this same question because one of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach young people and, of course, parents with relationship education. If I had a room full of 1,000 high schoolers and I could only share with them one piece of advice on relationships, what would you want me to tell them?
I think I would tell them that they need to really listen to themselves about what's going on in the relationship and what's going on with the person. I think I would need to tell them that so many people have a clue from the first 2 times they meet someone, and then they override it. They don't believe themselves. So I think I would tell them to try and be honest about who they are and try and be honest about who the other person is and what it feels like to be with them.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Judith. Where can people find more about you and the Masterson Institute?
Okay, so we have a website, the International Masterson Institute. They can look that up. And I'm happy to get an email from anyone who wants to contact me.
And International MastersonInstitute.com is the website.
Yeah.
Great. And if you'd share your email, great. We'll put that in the show notes and people can listen to it here and write it down if they're listening.
Great. This has been fun. I just feel like, but wait, I was just getting started.
I know. Seriously.
All right. It must be time because here comes my doggie.
Yeah. And what's the best email?
Judith Pearson at Verizon.net.
Okay, great. And we'll put that in the show notes, Judith Pearson at Verizon.net. Wow.
My dog just walked in the door.
Okay, perfect timing. Judith, thanks so much. Really appreciate you and everything you've done for the field here.
Thank you very much, Jason.
All right. Definitely go check out the International Masterson Institute. Google James Masterson. Finding the Real Self is the book that Carolyn Bankston recommended to me that I'm reading. It's awesome. If you want to nerd out on this, I think it's quite interesting. Here at the Relationship School, we don't really teach about personality disorders. However, we do have an upcoming, or depending on when this comes out, a masterclass on personality disorders for our coaches, because they need to be able to see like, oh, is this what's going on? Because it's a different ballgame. And, like Judith and Carolyn both mentioned in these 2 podcasts, there's a spectrum. And you might find yourself or someone you know, like, oh, you might be relating to some of the stuff we talked about here, or thinking of someone in your life. And I teach and have taught for years this conflict between our strategic self and our true self. Masterson calls it the false self. I don't love that term personally. I think I don't know. It's just a strategy to get love and avoid pain and abandonment. And it's really true that for some of us to become an empowered, embodied, true human being, authentic to who we actually are, that is very confronting for some of us. And if you had early injuries between 0 and 3, your path is a little steeper because you have these deep relational fears that have to be confronted in the journey to self-actualize and to become yourself. So, in my book, Getting to Zero, I talk a little bit about this, well, quite a bit actually, about the inner conflict between our two selves, this true self and the strategic self. So I hope you have gleaned value from that book, or if you haven't received that book, gotten that book, please do. It's an excellent book. The personality disorders conversation is more for if you feel like you have chronic relationship problems, or that it's really hard for you. I would really look into this, because again, the proper diagnosis can get you the right kind of treatment and the right kind of support. So this action step really is about self-reflection. Can you just reflect on your own life? And yes, you don't have memories probably 0 to 3, but you probably still have dynamics with your mother in particular, but perhaps your parents, caregivers, but often it's the mother, that are sticky, that are challenging, that are complicated. Well, it might be that template got laid down way, way early. So I encourage you to journal about that and then share it, as always, with a friend so you don't have to be in isolation. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day, evening, morning, and get connected, get reconnected over and over and over again. If you live in the United States and you want to receive text messages from me about my personal life or little daily reminders, you can do that now. It's so cool. And you just need to text the number 720-704-4852, or you can go to my.community.com/Jason Gaddis. And that way you can sign up for text. And if you just text me podcast, I know you came from the podcast, and I will be sending you text messages. You can always stop at any time just by typing in STOP. All right? Yeah, I look forward to connecting with you on your phone, folks. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener, where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/get coaching now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships, and you are one of them, so thank you.